Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to session 1, track B. And I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all of you for participating in this session this morning. It's my honor and privilege to be here as moderator. In this session, we'll talk about heightening the productivity of elder workers. Korea is now aging very fast, maybe outpacing all the other economy in the world. Thus, recently a bill requiring the mandatory retirement age at 60 has been passed and will be enforced in 2016. So nowadays, many Korean companies are very busy in preparing for that bill by coming up with several measures such as smart workplace and introducing flexible work hours. So I guess the issue of aging workforce and productivity to be a perfect topic to be discussed today. Let me explain how this session will go. We have 2 speakers and 2 panelists. First, for 2 speakers, for you will be given 25 minutes each for your presentation. And then for 2 panelists, you will be given 10 minutes each for your presentation. And then the remaining time will be given to the floor for your question and comment. And if you have, during their presentation and discussion, if you have any question and comments, please, you may write down your question and comments and deliver it to me, then I'll cover them first. Now, let's get started. I would like to invite first Mr. Doherty to present your presentation. You may sit down. I will introduce our first speakers. His name is J. Doherty. He is a partner at Mercer Consulting and a co-founder of its Workforce Science Institute. And he received an MBA degree from Dartmouth Graduate School of Business at University of Virginia, USA. He's really a well-known expert in labor market trend, workforce planning, site selection, and linking people management practice to business result. He has over 30 years of management consulting experience, all of helping companies across the globe. Now, please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Changho. And I can't tell you how honored I am to be here as part of the Global HR Forum, together with my co-speaker, Jose Luis Cordeiro, and the other discussants. The whole topic of aging workforce is so much broader than simply the issues that you face here in Korea. There are many other nations that are struggling and are beginning to come up with solutions on how to adapt and better manage the different generations that are in the workforce. So we've heard from many of the other panelists yesterday about the aging phenomenon and what is going to happen, and that we're going to be growing and adding 1.1 billion more people that are over 60 years of age before we reach 2050. So if the younger people, as they think about their career, that growth is going to create a lot of changes, some turmoil, but a lot of opportunities too in the workforce. In Mercer's human capital work, we have focused a lot of our research, and that is the purpose of the Mercer's Workforce Sciences Institute, is to look at, from a scientific way, from using big data to understand workforce issues and improve the state of human capital management. So we look at these demographic issues, see how they affect different countries and different businesses and industries, and have very different impacts, which means that you can't have simply one approach to dealing with aging in the workplace and the overall population, that you have to be quite adaptive depending on you as an employer, how you derive value to your customers and your business from different types of experience in the workforce, and understand that, and then determine what are the policies that will fit your business. The same thing happens for educators and for policymakers at a country level in understanding how that growth, that 1.1 billion, that's going to be quite unevenly distributed around the world as we continue to see great aging in places like Korea, Japan, China, of course the United States, Russia, and we continue to see a very young cohort in sub-Saharan Africa and other economies. So let's take a look at Korea. Here we have a profile, the denser colors outlined in the lighter colors outlined in the middle of the workforce. The outskirts are the entire population. And we see in that golden area the 45s and above. So if this is what the organization looks, the overall corporate organization looks like, that's people working, both entrepreneurs as well as in corporations in Korea. You see over time how that group will rise. More and more will have less labor participation as they grow older, at least if the current trends continue. And we won't necessarily have all of the skills and expertise behind them, particularly with the very low birth rate here in Korea. So employers will be faced with the challenge of replacing that knowledge if they can't keep that knowledge in the workplace. So for businesses that require a great deal of expertise that takes a long time to develop, think about medical doctors or university professors or refinery managers, of how it takes often 15, 20 plus years to develop a competence, that business is at risk. If they can't figure out either how to retain that knowledge profitably or how to take the younger cohort and get them to levels of competency much quicker than the earlier generation. So this is the challenge. We look at this work, and today this comes from work that Mercer and the World Economic Forum did in coming up with a human capital index, which talks about how nations have managed their human capital. And Korea does very well. Out of 122 nations, Korea is number 23 in the world in looking at across all those economies. Number 6 in Asia Pacific. Not a surprise. Out of the 4 pillars of the Human Capital Index, one is education, and that is the area that Korea, as everyone is aware, has always excelled in. So that is today. The challenge, though, will be in the future, how do you maintain that competitiveness? So here we see the median age for Korea is 38, and the percent over 60 is about 16%. That is going to grow significantly. There are other countries that are in similar situations. Many of the G7, together with Russia, have similar profiles and are struggling with how better to manage an aging workforce and also the other generations as they grow. So what are those key challenges? There's a lot of misconceptions, not enough sometimes facts about what is involved in managing an older workforce, whether this is a good thing or whether this is what prevalence is that there are more concerns about an older workforce. It's usually that older workers, is true, on balance, are more expensive than younger workers. That's due to the rewards that they get over their career. So most of you that choose to work not for yourself but for companies will find that your career rewards, the ones that grow over time, far outweigh any bonus you will receive in any 1 year or an immediate reward. So it's the value that you get over career, and those rewards often stay with you for as you progress in your career. So naturally, the older workers that possess some of those skills and have been in that career track longer have higher rewards, higher cost. Question is, are they higher productivity or not? Other issues that we deal with are a lot of economies and industries have a bimodal workforce. Maybe the population doesn't have a lot of young people and a group that are getting ready to retire with very little in the middle, but the industry that they're working in does, because they didn't hire, they didn't train for a period of time. So they have these two groups, and struggling to better manage that. Identifying the critical skills, particularly those that take a long time to develop, and being proactive, understanding not what you have today, but what are the needs going to be 5 and 10 years from now, and taking actions now that are more cost efficient than waiting for the problem to occur. And then retaining critical talent, whether that talent is retirement eligible or younger cohorts that may have lots of opportunities elsewhere, and making sure that we're keeping them. Why is this important? Not just for individual businesses, but it's almost as whole industries and countries. We've also heard from other panelists yesterday how workforce is becoming more mobile. I often hear that businesses complain that their workers are not as loyal as when earlier generations. And I said, well, perhaps it is the businesses that are not recognizing and rewarding the loyalty as opposed to the worker necessarily. But it is true that we see greater rates of mobility in the workforce. That'll probably continue to progress across most of the developed world. The jobs, as you look across different industries, where you place a job, depending on the industry, can have lots and lots of choice. So, healthcare, there's not a lot of choice you need today. Maybe in the future a lot less through technology, but today you need the healthcare worker close to where they need to serve. But in IT, in much of manufacturing, aerospace, consumer products, there over 50% of the jobs and functions have some element of location choice, meaning independent of the customer, independent of where the natural resources are, a business can choose where to place that job. So yes, there's a choice of where workers can go to work, and are they going to move or not, but where jobs are located. There's more and more choice today. That didn't exist 20 years ago because of logistics concerns, telecommunications concerns, shipping, that didn't exist, and most importantly, a qualified workforce. But the education growth of qualified workforce in the developing world has grown significantly, so this really affects the competitiveness of industries at a country level. And when we look at choices that companies make, and these are not survey results, but actual site selection location choices where companies are investing maybe a few million, but others in here are over $10 billion in a site, and saying, how are you choosing that site? And if you look up here and just scan, it's surprising how many are human capital related factors. So the labor availability, supply and demand, the quality and education level, of course the cost of labor is in there. Turnover, so how stable will the workforce be? These are the factors that actually impact decisions on investment. So one way of measuring the impact of whether a country is succeeding or not is the amount of foreign direct investment. So as you look and how competitive is your workforce in each of these factors when businesses that are more and more global and have these great choices of where to locate jobs, where are they going to choose? And the labor component has grown to be the predominant decision criteria, the one with, frankly, the greatest variability. Whereas in the past, it might have been telecommunications cost or infrastructure, transportation networks, port facilities, and now it really is the driving force is human capital. So if an individual business is trying to understand how to capitalize on what it sees in its older workers, how does it go about that? Too often, I think we see very traditional methods of measuring worker productivity. They're individually focused, so they look at one person and say, are they productive, are they cost effective or not? Some businesses look at both these traditional measures and also at what are called non-traditional measures of productivity and try to understand the impact. And I say try to understand by measuring the impact of different cohorts of workers, so older workers or different education levels, or how similar groups of people are working together versus how diverse a group, and how does that affect the performance of that business unit or work group. Performance in terms of the workforce measure, so its performance level, its stability, but also the business performance, which of course could be the economic return, productivity, finance, but it's also things like safety records, degree of innovation, customer satisfaction. So we see, not everywhere, but in some instances in businesses where older workers have a more profound impact on the workforce through non-traditional measures. So not just a supervisor that might have more tenure and more age, but a work group that is made up of a mix of younger and older workers may be more stable as a group than one that's made up of a much younger cohort. Often, older workers can facilitate knowledge sharing and transfer, and sometimes that works in the opposite way. You have to make sure the incentives are in place to do that. One of the themes of the conference is trust, and if older workers trust the employer is encouraging them to share their expertise and knowledge and incenting them in terms of their work, then they'll be more open to sharing that information in mentoring the younger workers. If there isn't a trust, if the belief is the employer is looking to exit that worker, then that knowledge transfer may not be happening as effectively or may not be happening at all. So we sometimes see these group effects that older cohorts can have on innovation. When you have a group where you have a mix of age groups together, the older workers sometimes introduce a degree of collaboration, of less competition in the group, to where you have sparks of innovation that you might not see in a more homogeneous group made up of, just say, a younger group. So how do you determine these things of whether or not you have the right workforce composition or not? And one of the disciplines, there are really two disciplines out of the Workforce Science Institute that we rely most heavily on. One is organizational psychology, understanding individual and small group behavior. The other is labor economics. And see, understanding the whole system, not just one practice. So it's not understanding older workers, it's understanding how the older workers fit in your overall workforce, what their contributions are. It's not understanding your retirement policies, it's understanding how those policies fit with your selection and training and performance and how you lay out work. So think in a systems way, the way economists would, and also from a flow, the way that people in finance or logistics will track money, resources. You should be looking at the flow over time of your workforce. Who comes to work, how you select them, which jobs you put them into, which employee groups do well and progress, which choose to vote with their feet and may leave. So that's the first thing, and then you can ask yourself, if you start to measure those, do seasoned employees create value, and how do they go about doing that in the business? And sometimes the answer will be that in some jobs, they're peak and the business needs to exit those workers, that it doesn't fit the business model as effectively. And others, it needs to work very hard and be adaptive to different employment propositions to encourage not the worker to stay beyond what is healthy, but to extend their work life, particularly if they have not prepared themselves for retirement themselves and want to stay engaged in the workplace. So understanding older workers comes to, how are they delivering value? How do you reward? Maybe all your rewards are centered towards new entrants and mid-career people. And do you need to change that and have a different proposition for your more seasoned workers? And then ask yourself, the nature of your business, is it changing? The nature of work. We've heard so much from the futurists again yesterday about how work itself is changing. What are going to be the impact of technology and information, globalization on your business, on your industry, and how that will affect each generation of worker? How many new skills? And there's the facts are the researchers, and we work together with the Stanford Center for Longevity in understanding the medical implications, is that when you get older, it is more difficult to learn. It takes longer. You might have a greater desire sometimes to learn, but it does take longer than when you were younger. However, contrary to most opinions, the knowledge that you have doesn't deteriorate very quickly. Matter of fact, if you take the Alzheimer's effect out, the knowledge that you built up over your career will stay with you and will really not deteriorate much more than it would when you're in your 30s and 40s. So I think that's encouraging for us that are getting a little bit older, just a little, that we're going to remember those things. So again, the concept of understanding not your workforce, not from a spot point, not treating it like a commodity or saying what's happening today, but looking at it over time, that you build up an organization. And the difference between, say, tracking money or commodities is that people have a memory. They remember what happened to them yesterday, how you treated them. And if they were high performing yesterday, they're going to be high performing today, until you do something that dramatically shakes them up. So when you go and try to measure the impact of which groups of employees, whether it's older workers or not, are contributing to value in your business or not, you need to do that over time and understand where you're bringing people into the organization, which jobs you're putting them in, which ones you're valuing in terms of promotion and competence and moving up in the organization, where you're giving different experiences and lateral movements back and forth in the organization, and the choices that you're making, and then of course what the employees are telling you in terms of, are they staying with your organization or are they leaving? If you measure these things and all of the descriptives behind it. So someone's at an individual level, their education, where they started, their expertise, their age, and then organizational aspects, who their supervisor was. Did they do really well because they had a supervisor that had broad experience in an organization and knew lots of departments? Or did they do very well because that supervisor had great expertise in one field? And each organization will tell a different story. Understanding that helps to optimize and help you make decisions on what your employment proposition should be to meet your business objectives. So here is a simple example. Maybe not so simple in terms of many arrows, but but you look at that prior slide and you track everything through, and just breaking out across 4 generations, we're seeing what happens. It's an IT company, and turnover for the older workers is naturally much lower than the younger workers. No surprise there. Promotion probability over your career goes down significantly. So the Gen X has the highest, actually a higher promotion than the Gen Ys in this, for this particular organization. The ratings, predominantly higher ratings are going to the Gen Ys. Again, not unusual in an organization that the higher ratings go to the younger cohorts. But you'd say, is that making, does that make sense? Is that right for this business or not? Pay and other rewards, pay growth, again, different generations will see different impacts. And this is controlling for a group, about 60 other factors going on in the organization about the individual, organization practices, and what's happening out in the labor market. So you run these models, and today we call it big data. 20 years ago, we just simply referred to it as an internal labor market analysis. So just like you have an external labor market, for those of you that are managing companies, managing organizations, you're managing a labor market and making choices every day. And this is a way of getting hard measures about those choices and the outcomes of each one of those decisions, about who you're selecting, who you're training, who you select as supervisors, where you're hiring and at what level of the organization, how they play out in terms of the organization you have today and the one you'll have in the future. So let's, and what does it mean in terms of different practices for managing workers? Once you measure the value and you determine that certain older workers are delivering experience, either through their whole career across many companies, what economists would refer to as general human capital, or these mature workers are delivering value through firm-specific human capital, that is, knowledge gained only at one employer, really only valuable to that one employer, but takes many years to develop, that is how that business creates value for its customers. Then you figure that out in which jobs are most critical in delivering that value. Then you can move to deciding, do we change different policies? And companies today that have figured this out and have said, these are the workers that we need to retain, even though they have choice today. And maybe even though we have created incentives for them to leave the organization, we need to change that around and look at things first by putting in better workforce planning processes to understand what is happening, but then looking at specific policies like phased retirement. Phased retirement happens informally in many economies, often not formally because of legislated reasons. But phased retirement works in the informal in the United States far more than formal practices. The extending careers, so figuring out ways of allowing the responsibilities of the older workers to shift. Maybe you take away certain safety duties that are required in terms of a day-to-day day-to-day management and replace those with mentorship responsibilities. Better succession planning, knowledge transfer. Knowledge transfer has to ensure that both the mentee and the mentor have incentives aligned, that both are working together. And that there isn't any incentives in the reward mechanisms, whether formal or informal, that would discourage the older cohort from sharing their knowledge and expertise with younger workers. So I'll leave you with just 3 thoughts in terms of this mindset that we see firms moving more and more to a set of looking at these human capital decisions as a form of asset management. And it's not to be harsh around employees, but to value them the same way that we do other assets. That if you really treasure an asset, then you're going to take care of it, you're going to measure it, you're going to understand whether it's growing in value or not. So it's that mindset of asset management around the workforce that you've created. Your assets are not just in the bank, or in the ground, or with your customer list. Your other asset is the workforce that you've built. That, together with beginning more quantitative approach to human capital management. Sometimes you have to reach outside of traditional HR for the skill sets to bring those quantitative skills that we see being used in finance or customer management or information technology and apply them to workforce. And then finally, measure the impact, first to the workforce and lastly to the overall business impact. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. From my experience, I totally agree with you saying that we need to look at human capital decision as an asset management. Yeah, that's totally. Okay, now we move to our next speakers. He is Jose Cordeiro, who is currently a founding faculty of Singularity University. He got his PhD degree in the interdisciplinary science at Universidad Simón Bolívar. Do I pronounce it correctly? Okay. Now he served as a Venezuela delegate of the Millennium Project and has various work experience at research institute and consulting firms, including Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology in Russia and Buzal and Hamilton. And he has written many books. And I presume that many of you are already familiar with his course book titled 2020 Transhuman and Economy of the Future, which was published in Seoul in 2006. Let's welcome, please. Let's give him a big applause.
안녕하세요. It's a pleasure for me to be back in Korea. The first time I was here was a quarter of a century ago at the time of the Olympic Games. So I have been many, many times since then in Korea, a country that I really like very much and I have seen growing very fast and I admire. So I'm going to talk about what is happening with aging and what different organizations are thinking about this and the possibilities of the future. I work with the Millennium Project that began 20 years ago as the futuristic part of the United Nations. And we have groups of futurists all over the planet, including here in Seoul, Korea. We publish every year a report called The State of the Future that is recommended by Ban Ki-moon at the United Nations as the best book about the future. So if you want to see the trends that are going to happen in the next 10, 20, 50 years. And also, I lived 3 years in Tokyo. I was working for JETRO, which is the equivalent of KOTRA in Japan, looking at the future of humanity, because I am very excited about Asia. I think East Asia is where the future of humanity will be written. And so I also, from Tokyo, I visited a lot Korea and also China. Because I repeat, the next 50 years of globalization and the future of humanity will be written in this part of the world that is the most dynamic part of the world. In fact, that is why people say dynamic Korea. As it was mentioned, I have a couple of books written in Korean, even though my Korean is not too good. One was published by Kyobo, and the other one by Chosun Ilbo, about what will happen in the next few decades. And I have been in many interviews with all the newspapers, and I just finished 2 TV programs about the future with KBS that should be coming out in December. But to talk about the future and longevity, I work in a university that was created 5 years ago in Silicon Valley in California. It was created by NASA and Google, and I am pretty sure that you all know NASA and Google, and we deal with the issue of the singularity. The technological singularity is the most incredible event in the past, present, and future of humanity. There is nothing that compares to the technological singularity. But I guess that some of you might not know what the technological singularity is. So let me show you that cover issue of the Time magazine a few months ago, where they take the late year when we expect the singularity to happen in 2045. And if you read the subtitle, some of the incredible consequences of the singularity, the year man becomes immortal. But for the ladies here, do not worry. Also, women will become immortal in 2045. The idea of the technological singularity was popularized by a colleague of mine, also from my alma mater, MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Ray Kurzweil. Ray Kurzweil has been talking about technological change for many decades. And he wrote a few years ago this book, The Singularity is Near, that is recommended by Bill Gates as the best book about the future of humanity. And he talks about the time when artificial intelligence will reach human intelligence. We expect this to happen between 2029 and 2045. So this is very close. This is 2 to 3 decades away from now. And how can we know if we are going to have artificial intelligence reaching human intelligence and then overtaking our intelligence? You can look at computers and how they have been improving. According to Moore's law, Gordon Moore was co-founder of Intel, and he discovered 50 years ago that computers doubled their power every 2 years, and that the price was decreased. If you look at that chart, it has Moore's law on an exponential logarithmic scale that shows the incredible power of computers. And how, if this continues, and we expect this to continue, in fact to accelerate, between 2029 and 2045, we will have computers that have more transistors than we have neurons in our brain. And this will be the beginning of the technological singularity. And you might remember 30 years ago when I was learning computer science, we used this, the IBM punch cards. This has 1K of memory, 1K, basically 10 rows times 100 columns. 10 by 100, 1K, 1,000. These were substituted later for electromagnetic memories, which were better. This was one of the first ones also. This has 1K, but this 1K was better because you could erase. And then we have gone through different generations, as you know. I don't have to show you all the different generations, every time becoming smaller and smaller. Here I have a latest pen drive. This one has 128 gigabytes. This has happened in the last 30 years. We have gone from 1K to 128 gigabytes. This will continue. In fact, this will accelerate in the next few years. And between 20 and 30 years, we will have computers with many more transistors than we have neurons in our brains. And that will be the beginning of the technological singularity. You can see this in many technologies, and not just information technology, but also in biotechnology. And I want to show you my human genome. I sequenced my human genome about 5 years ago, when it was still very expensive. And once you sequence your genome in the next 5 to 10 years, and all of you will sequence your genome, you will see why soon, you will know which diseases you will have. If you look at my genome, you see the probability of me having cancer, having diabetes, and other things I don't want to show, like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. But all of that information is in your human genome. Also, your physical characteristics, your physical traits. What is the color of your eyes? What is the color of your hair? With a little device like this, which is called a gene chip, you will sequence your genome in the next 5 to 10 years, all of you. And you will know what you will die of. But so that you do not die of, because medicine is going to change radically in the next 10 years. Medicine will no longer be curative. Medicine will be preventive. And we will prevent all diseases in the next 2 decades. So you will know what you will die of, so that you do not die of that. And you will also know where you come from. This is my paternal line 500 years ago. You can see where the ancestors of my father come from. All this information is in your genes, including famous people related to you. If you look at that chart on the bottom right, you will see famous people related to me, like Genghis Khan. So I am partly a descendant also of Genghis Khan. Now I will show you my maternal line, and you will see where my mother's family comes a few centuries ago, and famous people related to my mother. Also on the bottom right, you will see the name Maria Antoinette. So I come from a very aristocratic family between Maria Antoinette and Genghis Khan. All of you will know this once you sequence your genome, and you will be able to reconstruct your genealogical tree, and for the first time, verify scientifically if your father is really your father. But not only we will look into the past, we will create the future. And this is an experiment I did with one of my students, sharing genes. We shared genes. Obviously, this is a theoretical experiment to see how our descendants would be. And you here, you are part of the last non-designed human generation. All the humans in the next few years will begin to be designed according to the genes that the parents want for their children. Now, you might think that this is very expensive. Well, this was incredibly expensive when it began. In the year 1990, the USA launched the Human Genome Project, which lasted 13 years, and it cost the US government over $1 billion. One genome, 13 years, $1 billion. Today, at the end of 2014, you can sequence your genome for about $1,000 in 1 week and a half. In the future, by 2020, you will sequence your genome for less than $100 in 1 hour. And all of you will sequence your genome, and you will know what you will die of so that you do not die of that. This is happening, I repeat, in all technologies, because they are changing not only exponentially, but they are becoming faster, everything is smaller, cheaper, and better. In fact, we need to begin thinking exponentially, but our brains only think linearly. So we cannot understand the velocity of the change today because we think linearly. But to give you a comparison, if you give 30 linear steps, after 30 steps of 1 meter, you have advanced 30 meters. But if you give 30 exponential steps, after 30 steps, you have gone 26 times around planet Earth. So this is hard to understand, but this is how technology works. Technology is changing exponentially. And this is happening also in economics. You can see that countries are growing faster and faster because we know now how to improve the economic systems. Also throughout history, you can see that in the 11th, 12th centuries, there was almost no economic growth. It only began actually during the Industrial Revolution at the end of the 18th century. And look at the incredible growth of the 19th century, over close to 100% GDP growth for the planet. And last century, the 20th century, 400% GDP growth. We expect that this century, humanity will grow more than 5,000%. We have not seen anything yet of what there is going to happen in terms of growth. So what is happening with lifespan also? If we go 2,000 years ago, the average life expectancy of humans was 25 years. Then it increased. It began increasing, it went to 40, Then at the turn of this century, from the 20th to the 21st century, we were over 25 years of age, life expectancy. Soon, we will reach 100, and then we will become immortal. Thanks to medical advances, we will actually do something incredible, or that seems incredible today, the control of the aging process. We are going to see the death of death. Death will die in the next 30 years. And actually, just to tell you about the future, we futurists, we talk about 4 ways to think about the future. The worst way is passive, like an ostrich. You don't want to see what is going to happen. It is a little bit better to be reactive, like a firefighter that participates when there is a fire. It is even better to be proactive, when you buy insurance to prepare yourself. But the best way is to be proactive, to create the future that you want. So I hope that there are no ostriches here, because ostriches are not Korean. But if we have ostriches, they should be technological ostriches to see the future. A few years ago, I visited one of the most famous science fiction authors, Sir Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote Space Odyssey 2001 that became a Hollywood a movie, very famous, and many other science fiction books and movies. But the reason why I visited him is because he wrote the 3 laws of the future half a century ago. And he said, first law of the future, when a famous scientist says that something is possible, he's probably right. But when he says it is impossible, he's probably wrong. Second law of the future, the only way of discovering the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. Third law of the future, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So I am here to talk to you about magic, because the technologies of the future are going to look like magic to us today. If we go 30 years into the past, there were no personal computers. And I repeat, I used this at the time with the big computers, because there were no personal computers. 20 years ago, mobile phones were beginning to spread throughout the planet. 10 years ago, Google was a very small company in California. What is going to happen in the next 10, 20, 30 years? Incredible things, magical things. One of those magical things will be the control of aging. We are going to see, I repeat, the death of death in the next 30 years. In fact, one of our professors at Singularity University, he says that aging is a disease, but it is a curable disease that we are going to cure in the next 20 to 30 years. For that, he created a foundation called the Methuselah Foundation to create a little mouse that will live as long as Methuselah, 1,000 years. This foundation was created 10 years ago because doing experiments with a little mouse is very good because they only live a year and a half. So you can do many experiments with mouse and know how much longer they are living. In the last 10 years, they achieved a life expectancy increase of 3 times for a mouse. We now have mice that live 5 years, which is the equivalent of 300 human years. The equivalent of 300 human years. And for other species, even longer life expectancies. This was done in the last 10 years. So I ask you, what do you think is going to happen in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, in the next 30 years? We will live indefinitely. Actually, we know today, scientifically, that we already have immortal cells. The germinal cells do not age. The sperm and eggs do not age. And also the worst cells, cancer cells, they do not age. Actually, cancer cells are good cells that mutate. They are a mutation that stops aging. Cancer cells do not age. So we do know that there are cells that do not age already. The best one, the germinal cells, reproductive cells, and the worst ones, cancer cells. So immortality is not impossible. We already have immortal cells in our bodies. So there are many foundations and institutions working on immortality research. Actually, Google just created a company to solve the problem of death. And I repeat, we expect to solve that problem in 20 to 30 years. There will be no death at that time, or it will be optional. If you want to die, you are free to die. But most people will decide not to die. Also, just recently, a new Nobel Prize was created in California for immortality. This prize will be awarded for the next time next year for the scientists working on longevity research. And I repeat, we expect in 20 to 30 years to cure aging. And let me talk quickly about the technologies of the future. According to the National Science Foundation in the USA, they are nano, bio, info, and cogno. These technologies will change humanity. And more than humanity, they will change humans. All of us will be changed by these technologies. And the convergence point, which is the singularity, will happen between 20 and 30 years when we will reach immortality. Actually, we are going to reach immortality from two fronts, from the hardware side and from the software side. Nano and bio are the hardware of life, and info and cogno are the software of life. And in the next 20 to 30 years, we will become immortal both on our hardware side and on our software side. Let me show you quickly what is the complexity of the human hardware. Our human genome is 3 gigabytes of information, 3 billion pieces of information. This is what you will know once you sequence your human genome. We are 3 gigabytes of data. That is what we are, human beings, biologically, our human hardware. Scientists created 14 years ago the first artificial virus, but a virus is very small. 4 years ago, they created an artificial bacteria, but bacteria are still very small. Well, in the next 20 years, we will be able to create something as complex and then more complex than a human. I have a pen drive here of 128 gigabytes, and the human genome is 3 gigabytes. So how many humans can I fit in this pen drive? I can fit 42.6 human genomes here. All of us almost could fit in this pen drive. Now, I will show you the complexity of the human software, which is based on the brain. The brain is where the processing, the software of the human happens. A brain has 10 to the 11 neurons. Each neuron has 1,000 connections, which gives 10 to the 14 synapses. And each synapses computes at different frequencies. The brain has 6 frequencies: alpha waves, beta waves, delta waves, mu waves, etc. All those frequencies basically give a computational capacity of the brain of 10 to the 17 operations per second. So that is what is the processing of the software of humans, 10 to the 17 operations per second. And we are going to reach that level of complexity in the next 20 years. So if we don't talk about the mind, the spirit, and the soul, and I love to talk about the mind, the spirit, and the soul, but only after 3 glasses of red wine, then basically a brain is a machine that computes 10 to the 17 operations per second. But that is the largest possible brain today. There could be also smaller brains, but also scientists are beginning to do experiments in brain-to-brain connections. Last year, the first memory transmission from a mouse to another mouse was done, and a few months ago, from a brain of a monkey to another monkey brain. This is also incredible. We are beginning to understand how to transfer memories from one brain to another brain. And soon we will be able to read our brains, actually. We have devices that read part of your thoughts, and we transfer them. In fact, there are companies that are having more and more electrodes that will be able to let us communicate from brain to brain, basically like telepathy. Telepathy is scientifically possible, and it is just starting. We will soon communicate better brain to brain directly. And we will merge with the robots. Look at the last 15 years of the robot Asimo by Honda. Can you imagine the next 15 years of Asimo? In 15 years, Asimo will be more human than we are. In fact, Honda says that in 20 years, a robotic team will win the football World Cup. So if South Korea doesn't hurry up, it will no longer win the football soccer cup because it will be a robotic team, that it could be a Korean robotic team. And robots will be fantastic. They will have incredible abilities that we do not have as humans, and they will have feelings. At MIT, at my alma mater, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, there are several scientists working on understanding the feelings of robots. And in the parliament in Tokyo, and in the parliament also in Seoul, for the first time, some senators are beginning to discuss a law to give human rights to robots. It is possible that in Japan, or maybe in Korea, in 5 years, there will be a law to give human rights to robots. This is the beginning of what we are going to have in the future. And robots will be fantastic. Look at those female robots. And for women too, you will have your fantastic macho robots with the advantage that they will not get tired at night. But are robots good or bad? It depends on where you are. If you live in California, robots are normally bad. This is Terminator. The actor is Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was then governor of California, and he inaugurated Singularity University, the university where I work. He gave the opening speech at my university, and he said, fantastic, a university that is preparing humanity for the future, because the science fiction of today is the science reality of tomorrow. But again, we think robots are bad, and artificial intelligence might be bad, like in the movie Transcendence. Even female robots are bad. Even when they have robot sex, they are bad. But are robots good or are robots bad? It depends where you are born. If you are born in Japan, and I lived 3 years in Tokyo, I repeat, robots are good in Japan. All the Japanese know that robots are not only good, they are better than humans. When a human has a problem, who helps the human? Astro Boy, Atom Boy. Okay, he is the example of how the Japanese think. In fact, in Shinto, the Japanese traditional religion, in Shinto, robots have a soul. Robots have kami in Japan. So they have a soul. And that is why all Japanese companies are working with robots. In fact, to do work, increase the productivity, and increase the longevity of people, all Japanese companies. But this is not humans versus robots. This is humans and robots. This is the fusion of technology and humanity. And you can see the first cyborg, Olympic cyborg, 2 years ago in the London Olympic Games. This is just the beginning of what we are going to see. In fact, you might have noticed for the opening of the Football World Cup in Brazil 3 months ago, they had a paraplegic person that through a brain scanner and an exoskeleton stood up, even though was totally paralytic, and gave the opening kick of the World Cup. This is only the beginning of fusion between technology and humans, and we will see the first cyborg Olympic Games in October of 2016 in Switzerland. The first cyborg Olympic Games. This is the beginning of what we're going to see. All of this is called transhumanism. Science and technology to transcend human limitations. Humans are not the end of evolution. We are just the beginning of technological evolution. But we have to do it carefully. Okay, we don't want to finish like that. We have to do it carefully. So basically, just to wrap up, we are going to cure all the diseases. We are going to prevent, not cure, prevent all the diseases. There will be probably no paraplegics in 10 years. There will probably be no longer all these horrible diseases and Parkinson's in 20 years, in 30 years, no Alzheimer's. There will be no aging, in fact. We will stop aging. But everything, as the Chinese says, has yin-yang. And yin-yang is so complex that there is always the dark side of the force. And for that, let me show you the famous picture of the world at night by NASA. This was done in the research center where I work in NASA, California. And this is very, very famous. And the Chinese say that we have to light up the world, that instead of blaming darkness, it is better to light up a candle. And you can see the close-up of Korea. Korea actually is a divided nation. One of the most advanced nations in the world today, South Korea, with the best internet connection in the planet, while North Korea has no internet. North Korea is the last country in the world without internet, and there is no light. There are no cars. Very sad situation in Korea, but we have to think about the future. I was in North Korea 1 year ago. This is me in Panmunjom from the North Korean side, and we have to think that the world is one. We have to meditate about the future. We meditate a lot. And I finish with this Chinese word that I learned when I was living in Japan. If you know some Chinese characters, they are very complicated, and sometimes I wrote it upside down or sideways. Now I know how to write it. And this is the Chinese word that means crisis. In Chinese, in Mandarin Putonghua, it is Wei Jie, Wei Jie. Wei Jie has two characters. The first one means danger, but the second one means opportunity. Humanity is living the most incredible transformation in history. Nothing comparable to what we are going to see in the next 20, 30 years. There is a lot of danger, but there is a great opportunity. Kamsa Hamnida.
Thank you, Jose, for your wonderful and very informative presentation. You introduced this very wonderful word, death of death, and you said, in 2 to 3 decades, that will come true, right? So we need to survive for that time, and we have to enjoy it. Okay. Now, we have listened to our two speakers' wonderful presentation. So before we go over to panelist discussion, I would like to mention a couple of main points of their presentation. First, Jay has explained that it is important to capture and capitalize the value and productivity of maturing workforce, especially in the facing fast aging societies. And therefore, measurement of value of older workers' experience and scientific workforce planning should be seriously considered, right? And he also suggested that strengthening the aftermarket for older workers is very important to enable greater mobility in the labor market. That is beneficial to society. I guess this will give very important implications for Korean companies. And next, Jose introduced the concept of transhumanism, right? That is a little bit unfamiliar to us, and he tried to explore the aging issue from the new point of view. And he mentioned that the development of high medical and biotechnology and science also would get over human limitations and prolong human life by making human being much more healthier. And that could be helpful in resolving the decline of old workers' productivity in a totally different ways, I guess. And he has described a very interesting topic and showed a very bright future of human life. Thank you. Now, it's time to go over to our two panelists' discussion. And let me introduce first Dr. Haedong Kim. He joined B-1 Korea Company Ltd. in 1988 and has been the president of B-1 Company Ltd. And also the chairman of B-1 Taiwan since 2011. He got a PhD degree in business administration from Seoul School of Integrated Science and Technology, and right now he's also a visiting professor at that school. I will introduce both panelists at the same time. Okay. The next speaker, the next panelist, Dr. Byungjeun Kim. He's currently head of HR consulting at Kim & Jung. That is one of the very famous law firm in Korea. He received his PhD degree in international business strategy from Jung University. Dr. Kim has various work experience at prestigious consulting firms like Deloitte, Mercer, and Arthur Andersen Consulting. Thank you. First, I want to ask Haedong Kim have a comment on both speakers' presentation. You got 10 minutes.
10 minutes to handle these complicated issues. All right. Well, thank you for the instruction, the introduction, and thank you very much for inspiring speech, both of you. Looking at the floor, I can hardly find any elderly people here. I thought that we are talking about how to deal with the aging the worker and how to maximize their abilities in the workplace. But the most of you are looks very young. Well, I feel like that I'm the only of the old people in the whole room. So I'm in a way very impressed that although this is issue for the elder people, but you actively put your effort to handle these issues. Therefore, I see very, very positive futures in these complicated issues. Since the most of audience are Korean, I think it is more appropriate to speak in Korean when I have a message to the people here. Whereas I speak English when I address the question, both of you. Is it agreeable? Thank you very much. 오늘 그 두 분의 강의를 아주 잘 들었는데요. 같은 서브젝트를 가지고 이 two different 약간 다른 이슈가 있는 것 같은 느낌을 받았습니다. 먼저 첫 번째 그 세션에서는 그 제이가 지금 현재 우리가 지금 당면하고 있는 그런 문제점에 대해서 진짜로 어떤 그 해답을 좀 찾기 위한 어떤 이야기들을 했다면은 사실 저는 오늘 뭐 거기에 대한 좀 해답을 찾을 수 있지 않을까 하는 기대감을 가지고 오늘 이 자리에 참석을 했습니다만은 우리 또 호세는 저를 더 혼란하게 만든 것 같아요. 그럼 뭐 어떤 솔루션을 찾기 위해서 도움을 준 게 아니라 더 혼란을 줘서 컨퓨전을 줘서 뭐 그야말로 일반적인 우리가 상식적으로 아는 그런 솔루션보다도 더 어떤 비욘 그 어떤 노멀의 어떤 솔루션을 찾아야 되지 않겠느냐. 그래서 그 제이가 오늘 우리 당면한 문제, 오늘 당면한 문제, 내일의 어떤 솔루션을 찾는 거라면 우리 호세 그 강연자는 이제 다가올 미래, 디케이드를 말씀을 하셨는데 그 디케이드보다는 그야말로 내일 모레 글피의 문제 같은 느낌을 오늘 강력하게 받았습니다. 사실 이 분야는 제가 관심거리이기도 합니다. 저는 그 헬스케어 섹터에서 한 30년 동안을 일했기 때문에 굉장히 평화로운 그런 워크 인바이러먼트에서 일할 수 있는 그런 호사를 가졌습니다. 그 IT 인더스트리에서는 그 20년 전에 그 리더들은 지금 거의 무대에서 사라진 그런 인바이러먼트이라면 헬스케어는 그 20년, 30년 전에 그 세계를 리더하던 회사들이 아직도 세계를 리더하고 있는, 다시 말해서 헬스케어 쪽에서는 그 IT 쪽의 그 어떤 혁명적인 disruptive innovation이 아직 오지 않았다. 그런데 오늘 제가 헬스케어도 이제 그 평화로운 시절은 갔구나. 이제 곧 우리가 IT에서 그 경험한 그런 어떤 엄청난 혁명을 곧 우리가 그 경험하겠구나. 그러한 그 disruptive innovation이 헬스케어 쪽에 오면은 인류한테는 아까 이야기한 것처럼 대단한 축복입니다. 대단한 축복이죠. 이제 보니까 저만 아주 평화롭게 죽을 수 있는 권리를 가지고 있고, 여러분들은 아마 여러분들 자신이 언제 죽을 것인지를 그 결정하기 위해서 굉장히 힘든 시간을 오히려 겪어야 될 것 같은 오늘 느낌을 받았습니다만은, 인류한테는 축복이 저같이 그 헬스케어의 리딩 컴퍼니에서 일을 하는, 다시 말해서 그 리딩 컴퍼니한테는 아주 재앙일 수 있겠다는 생각을 해봅니다. 저희 회사가 175년 동안 그 운영이 되어 왔는데, 이제 175년이 문제가 아니라 앞으로 10년, 20년 동안 과연 서바이벌 할 수 있겠느냐, 뭐 이런 쪽에서 굉장히 오늘 그 중요한 메시지를 받은 것 같습니다. 제2 쪽의 서브젝트는 좀 어떤 그 인크리먼탈한 솔루션을 우리가 찾기 위한 트라이니까 아마 우리 김병전 교수님께서 뭐 좀 거기에 합당한 뭐 질문을 좀 해주시는 것이 더 어울릴 것 같고, 저는 그 호세의 그 혼란스러운 지금 그 서브젝트에 대해서 좀 큐리어스를 갖기 때문에 그쪽에 대해서 좀 질문을 했으면 합니다. Well, I'd like to address a question to Jose. The people put a lot of time and effort to exercise their body to fit. Whereas people do not have much time to really sharpening their brain to cope the new environment, which is certainly different from the old. And the working environment will be completely changed one day to another. Our brain fitness must be more important than body fitness. Body fitness, as you just mentioned, that there are lots of solutions, gene tag, nanotech, robotech, so that we will have such advanced technologies to enhance our body. Whereas, of course, the artificial intelligence at the end of the day will help our brain to fit our new environment. But that is still external things. Artificial intelligence is not something will happen in our own brain, but that will be the solution externally. Then, how we really can sharpen our brain to fit the new working environment? Could you share something?
Actually, that is a fascinating question because we don't know yet the potential of the brain. Our human brain has not evolved in the last 50,000 years, and we have learned incredible things in these last 50,000 years, like making the wheel, writing, reading. These are new inventions, to put it this way, in human history. So we still will be able to do many more things with our brain. But now we have the technologies also to improve our brain. I'm fairly sure that in the next few years, we will not say, I do not know anymore. I do not know will disappear because we will have our brains connected continuously to internet, to the cloud. And you will always be able to find out the information that you are looking for. So we will increase our capabilities in a very incredible way, like magic. It will be magical. In 5, 10 years, you will no longer say, I do not know, because you will know. If you want to know something, you will know it. So we will improve our capabilities. We will increase the productivity of the people, of the companies, of the whole planet Earth. We are really living very interesting times, and we will improve our brains.
Okay, since we are running out of time, I assume your discussion is finishing. Okay, now let's turn our mic to Byungjeun Kim for his discussion.
네, 그 두 분 발표하신 분들 말씀 잘 들었습니다. 감사드리고요. 되게 인상적인 발표였던 것 같습니다. 근데 이제 저는 이제 기업 쪽의 자문을 많이 하다 보니까 이제 김현장에서도 이제 법률 서비스도 하지만 여러 가지 이제 노동 문제라든가 인사 문제에 대해서 자문을 하고 있습니다. 근데 이제 제 입장에서는 기업과 일을 하면서 다분히 현실적인 문제들과 많이 접하고 있어서 오늘 발표분들이 실제 그 현실과 그다음에 앞으로 우리가 고민해야 될 국가적인 부분, 기업적인 측면, 개인적인 측면에 대한 과제가 좀 생각보다 좀 난제들이 많은 것 같다는 생각을 합니다. 저희가 보면 평균 지금 은퇴 연령이 우리나라의 경우는 한 53세 정도 되어 있습니다. 남자는 한 55세, 여자는 한 51세 되는 것 같은데요. 그리고 정년퇴임을 하는 분이 한 7% 정도 되는 것 같아요. 근데 최근에 이제 몇 가지 기업 측면 환경 변화가 있었잖아요, 법적으로. 예를 들어 정년이 연장되는 법안이 통과가 됐고요. 근데 정년이 수명이 연장됐으니까 이제 정년도 연장이 되는데, 문제는 그 노조나 직원들의 경우에는 당연히 그 환영을 하겠지만 기업적인 측면에서는 그 생산성 이슈로 인해서 상당히 부담을 많이 가지고 있죠. 그러다 보니까 임금 피크제라든가 이런 걸 도입을 하려고 하는데 동의가 잘 안 되고 있는 그런 상황인 것이고, 또 하나 최근에 뭐 아시는 기업에 계시면 알게 통상임금 이슈로 인해서 오버타임 이슈가 커지니까 결국에는 그것도 이제 생산성에 직접적인 영향을 미치는 부분이에요. 그러다 보니까 인력에 대한 뭐 구조조정 이슈도 있고, 특히 이제 생산 쪽 같은 경우에는 잘 아시겠지만 여기 오늘 그 고요 그 수명과 그다음 고연령 인력과 생산성 이슈에서 가장 큰 이슈 중에 하나는 제조업 부분인데요. 제조업의 경우에는 연공성 급여 구조잖아요. 그러니까 오래 근무할수록 급여가 계속 올라가 있는 구조인데, 결국에는 이런 통상임금 이슈로 인해서 타격이 오다 보니까 인력에 대한 뭐랄까 구조조정 이슈라든가 뭐 이런 이슈가 이제 많이 발생을 하고 있고, 또 하나는 정부에서 이제 고용 창출을 위해서 근로시간 단축 법안을 지금 냈잖아요. 그러니까 지금은 저희가 오버타임을 뭐 일정 시간 할 수 있는데 그걸 더 줄이는 거죠. 그러면 저 오버타임을, 그러니까 시간의 근로를 많이 못하게 만들면 40시간으로 줄여버리면 그 시간만큼 고용을 더 많이 해야 되기 때문에 일을 해야 되기 때문에 고용은 창출될 거라는 가정하에서 근로시간 단축이라는 이슈들도 이제 현재 제기되고 있는데, 문제는 생산 현장에서는, 특히 기업에서는 그 우리나라 임금 구조나 아니면 연공성 구조로 인해서 이런 외생적인 환경 변수 또는 외생적인 임팩트가 왔을 때 상당히 많은 부분 고연령 인력들이 이제 나가게끔 되어 있는 구조라는 거죠. 그러니까 오히려 저희 나라 같은 경우는 제가 알고 있기로는 OECD 국가에서 노인 빈곤율이 1등인 걸로 알고 있고요. 그다음에 노인 자살률이 또 1등인 걸로 알고 있습니다. 근데 그러니까 열심히 그 젊었을 때 일하고 자식 출가 다 하고 나면 노후가 편안해야 되는데, 저희 나라는 이렇게 어떻게 보면 애들 출가시키고 이제 회사를 그만두면 좀 불행한 나라인 것처럼 이제 지표들이 나와 있다는 거죠. 그런 측면에서 보면 사실 그 우리 인간의 수명하고 지금 우리 그 호세 교수님께서 말씀하신 앞으로 인간의 수명이 또 훨씬 더 늘어난다고. 인간의 수명은 이렇게 늘어나는데 지금 기업의 수명은 짧아지고 있잖아요. 우리나라 경우도 지금 100년 된 기업이 몇 개 없는 걸로 제가 알고 있고, 대부분 다 생겼다가 없어지는 그 주기가 너무 짧아지는데, 그러니까 인간의 수명하고 이제 기업의 수명하고 미스매치가 발생하다 보니까, 특히 저희 나라 경우에는 노동 시장이라는 것이 이제 직무 중심 시장이 아니고 기업 중심이잖아요. 또 고용, 오랫동안 고용하는 중심의 시장이기 때문에 그런 측면에서 본다면 시사하는 바는 상당한 부분 피곤함을 가중시킨다는 거죠, 지금 현재 상태에서. 근데 단기적으로 보면 정부에서 노력을 하고 기업에서 하지만 이 모든 것들은 사실 개인 이슈일 거라고 저는 생각을 하기 때문에 현장에서 보면 정부 정책을 통해서 마련하는 부분들, 아마 올해 2014년에 정부에서 뭐 작년 고용 종합 대책이라는 것을 잘 발표해서 그런 부분이 잘 시행될 것으로 저는 생각을 하지만 그건 시간이 필요할 것 같고요. 근데 기업에서는 생산성이라는 이슈로 본다면 고연령 인력에 대해서는 키핑하기가 참 어렵습니다. 제가 현장에서 보면 키핑할 이유도 없고요. 그러다 보니까 오히려 상당히 더 안 좋은 상황인 것 같고, 그러다 보니까 이 많은 그 책임 소재 아니면 이 대책이 개인적으로 지금 와가고 있는 게 아닌가, 저희 나라는. 그러다 보니까 정년에 닥쳐서 나이 먹어서 준비하기보다는 실제로 현실적으로는 30, 40대부터 좀 그런 부분에 대해 스스로 준비하는 부분들이 되게 중요할 것 같다는 생각이 들고요. 그래서 기업에서 뭐 이런 농담도 있지 않습니까? 신입사원이 회사 들어와서 가장 먼저 생각하는 게 딱 그 뭐 좋은 회사 들어가면 좋지 않습니까? 기분이 좋은데 그것도 며칠은 안 가는 거죠. 그래서 결국에는 그분들도 과거처럼 정년이라는 개념이 많이 줄어들었기 때문에 결국에는 앞으로 내가 뭐 해야 될지, 세컨잡이라든가 아니면 회사를 그만뒀을 때 뭘 할지에 대한 생각까지 신입사원 때부터 할 정도로 실제로 뭐랄까요, 좀 이슈들이 좀 많이 있기 때문에 국가적인 측면 또는 기업적인 측면, 개인적인 측면에도 종합적인 뭔가 고민들이 필요한 그 과제일 거라고 생각하고 있고요. 특히 2017년부터는 저희가 출산율이 낮아져서 생산 가능 인력들이 좀 적어진다고 일단 통계가 나와 있는데, 그렇다 보면 향후에 국가 경쟁력이나 기업 경쟁력을 확보하는 측면에서는 이런 그 고령 인력들이나 중장년 인력들에 대한 수요가 좀 많이 발생할 개연성이 있는데, 문제는 이런 부분들을 어떻게 관리할 수 있는 체계나 시스템, 프로세스는 되게 중요할 것 같아요. 근데 그런 측면에 봤을 때 우리 그 도어티 대표님께서 발표를 하시면서 되게 재밌는 뭐 의견 중에 하나가 기업에서 그 생산성을 볼 때 꼭 재무적인 생산성도 있지만 그 영향력을 중심으로 이제 생산성을 또 개별적이 아니라 전체적인 측면에서 생산성을 보고 인력 관리를 한다는 의견을 주셨는데 그런 부분에 대해서는 뭐 저희 기업이나 아니면 정부 측에서도 되게 뭐 사례나 이런 부분에 관심을 갖고 한번 연구해볼 부분이 있을 것 같긴 한데요. 그런 측면에서 혹시 해당 뭐 그런 사례나 어떤 기업들에 대해서 조금 뭐랄까 도움이 될 만한 좀 의견들이 있으면 조금만 구체적으로 한번 말씀해 주시면 좀 도움이 많이 될 것 같습니다.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. I think that last point of whether it's companies or even government policymakers traditionally have focused, when they talk about productivity, they focus on the denominator. That is the cost, and not what the value is. And the reason for that is quite simple. It's because they have good information around the cost, and they don't always have good information on the value that it and how to measure that. So we need to work harder at understanding, if you like, the top line of what it means for society to have a large number of experienced workers exit the workforce in terms of its competitiveness, and the same thing at an organization level. The other issue is that many organizations and policy makers focus almost exclusively on the adequacy to retire. That is an individual ready to retire financially, and not on what are the incentives that I'm putting into place, whether through government regulations or the way that I structure my rewards in a company that may encourage people to leave the workforce when it's not good for the business, for the country, or for themselves. You know, if you wish to retire, I think, you know, there should not be any barriers to allowing you to do that. But many people defined a lot of their social circle and elsewhere as the work that they do, their profession, their industry. And they don't necessarily adequately prepare themselves for retirement. Again, I'm not talking money. It is more their social circle and their connections, so that once they retire, their health deteriorates considerably if they don't prepare. And I think that business needs to do a lot more in helping its workforce to understand it getting ready for retirement, and then looking at those workers that do want to stay active in the workplace, allowing for that. So we see, you know, companies that traditionally focus all their training on younger workers are now discovering that there is reskilling for people in their 50s that is significant training investment that needs to happen, and not simply at the younger groups. In oil and gas industry, we see a number of examples of people that are financially able to retire, and sometimes they're structured where they can, if they keep working past a certain age, they're working for free. And some of them do, because they just are so engaged in their work, but many choose to exit or go to another employer, and that often is not healthy for either. Now, you know, again, all the young faces out there, we also see businesses where older workers are creating blockages for the younger groups to move up, to assume areas of responsibility, and that creates problems that those workers leave when they shouldn't, because they see too long of a career path before they get to the level of responsibility that see. So overall, it's let's measure it, let's look at incentives instead of adequacy, and look at what it takes in terms of training and other investments to adapt to this older workforce. I think it's critical for Korea to understand which part of the workforce needs to, with all the great experience, needs to stay in to maintain competitiveness given the demographics you face.
Okay, thank you. I guess that is enough for our discussion. Now we have around less than 6 minutes. Now let's turn to our audience, and I have 5 written questions, 3 for Jay and 2 for Jose. But I guess we are not able to cover all of this, so unfortunately, I think I have to exercise my discretion in selecting some of these questions. First, this question go to Jay. Most economies have the problem of aging population and youth unemployment. At the same time, life expectancy in most of these economies are higher now. So the question is, how do we match these two opposite issues?
For the quick answer to both of those, for the youth unemployment, I think the most critical thing, and this is the dilemma, that in the world today we have over 1 billion people that are underemployed or not employed, and yet at the same time we have businesses that are complaining the vast majority cannot find the skilled workers. So there is I think, a connection between the educators, whether they be trades or the university structure, that they need to work more closely with businesses to understand what are the skills to better prepare the people for employment, because that's part of life, and finding a career and for many and gainful employment, and the unemployment for the youth is not usually a lack of demand. There are issues in sub-Saharan Africa where the industry is just beginning, but largely it is a mismatch of skills. And it's not always the STEM traditional skills that we hear about so much in the press. It is communication skills, problem-solving skills that employers that the young workforce is not ready. So cooperation between business, educators, and government, and I think is critical at that end. And then at the other end of the spectrum is really there are too many unintended consequences of government with good intentions of creating employment rules that have unintended consequences of keeping people in the workforce longer than they should and forcing them out of the workforce when, from a health and vitality standpoint, they would do much better continuing to work. So, at the back end, let's get government out of the way, and at the front end, get government and educators more into the solution.
Okay, one for Jose. Japan and America, robotics and robot technology well developed, and Korea lag behind us. So in that case, what Korea should do to catch up Japan and Korea?
Actually, I would say that Japan is the #1 country in robotics. In fact, Japanese Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, he announced a few weeks ago that in 2020, after the Olympic Games in Tokyo, they will have also a robot Olympic Games. So they want to position themselves as the #1 country in the world in robotics. And as I said, also there are religious implications because robots have souls in Shinto religion. The USA, because it's a bigger economy, also has a lot of automatization. But I believe Korea is not far behind. In fact, yesterday, KAIST announced new types of robots. I believe probably, South Korea could be among the top 5 countries in robotics in the planet, certainly in humanoid robotics, which are the most interesting ones. So I'm not negative. I think the future of robotics in Korea is very good. Actually, I know that in Incheon, a robotics entertainment park is being built, which will be the first in the world. So Korea also has an interesting strategy for robotics, including English teachers who are robots. As you probably know that better than me, Korea is beginning this program where they will no longer use foreigners to teach English, but humanoid robots.
That's a very good evaluation for us to hear. Okay, now we are running out of time, so I'm sorry for not being able to cover all your questions raised from floor, but we have to wrap up this session. I'll say just one sentence. Even though we didn't cover much about this one, I would say all the workers have strong will and ability to contribute at workplace. And they are a big and important part of our society. So, and also they could be and should be a great asset to us. So we should make our best effort to find out very smart solution for this issue, right? Even in the future. So, time's up. I would like to close this session by saying thanks again, all of you, for your active participation in this session. I hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you.